member for Chesterfield and the Speaker at the meeting with the LTA and other interested parties.
Good. John Stevenson.
Number 11.
Minister
Mr. Speaker, the spring statement builds on the autumn budget, which resulted in an extra £950 million for the Scottish budget, and also at the spring statement, my right honourable friend the Chancellor announced a further £260 million commitment to the Borderlands growth deal.
John Stevenson.
Speaker, Scotland clearly receives a very fair share of funding, but the Scottish Government has decided to increase taxes. Right. Would the Minister agree that becoming the highest tax part of the United Kingdom risks undermining Scotland, particularly through investment and its wider economy?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is the case that substantial tax powers have been devolved to the Scottish Government, including those relating to the rates of income tax. But it is also the case that the UK Government is committed to bringing taxation down, first and foremost by increasing the personal allowance 1 year earlier than our manifesto commitment to £12,500 and reducing tax in total for over 32 million people throughout the UK.
Order! I hope colleagues across the House will want to join me in extending a warm welcome today to the United States Ambassador to the Court of St James, Woody Johnson. Woody, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Stuart Hosey.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I join with you in welcoming the United States Ambassador to see our deliberations today in Prime Minister's questions. Mr. Speaker, I recently announced at Prime Minister's questions that I would be chairing a serious violence summit, and I can inform the House that this will take place next Monday. The summit will bring together ministers, community leaders, agencies and experts to explore what more we can do as a whole society to tackle the root causes of serious violence, as well as intervening with those most at risk. Following the initial summit, Cabinet Ministers will be hosting a series of round-table discussions with national leaders and those on the front line. And this will complement the recent announcement of a £100 million violence reduction fund targeted at hotspot areas, along with the £200 million youth endowment fund that is being established this week. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Stuart Hosey.
I wish the Prime Minister well with the serious violence discussions he's having. However, Brexit is already costing the UK around £1 billion a week in lost growth. And we know that 80% plus of the public are unhappy with the way in which this has been handled. This is not the fault of Guy Verhofstadt, Michel Barnier, Donald Tusk or any MP in this House voting according to their conscience. That fault lies with the Prime Minister, who is the architect of the withdrawal deal. So can she finally concede to the House? She is liable, responsible, culpable for the chaos which is the Brexit debacle, and when she will be resigning.
Prime Minister.
To the honourable gentleman. The Brexit deal delivers on the result of the referendum. Now, the honourable gentleman has a different view to me. I know he doesn't want to deliver on the result of the referendum. He wants to try and keep the United Kingdom in the European Union. 17.4 million people voted to take us out of the European Union, and that's what we're going to do.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North West Leicestershire voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union, and for the past 2 years, the Prime Minister has told my constituents on over 100 occasions that we'll be leaving on the 29th of March 2019 with or without a withdrawal agreement. At the last minute, she begs our EU masters for an extension to Article 50, delaying our departure. Does my right honourable friend realise that the good people of North West Leicestershire, they will forgive her for this? Mr. Speaker, they're good people, but they're not stupid people, and they will never trust the Prime Minister again.
Can I say to
Prime Minister
that I hope the message he will take back to his constituents is a very simple one, which is we can indeed guarantee delivering on Brexit. We can guarantee delivering on Brexit if this week he and others in this House support the deal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This chaotic and incompetent government has driven our country into chaos. You know the scale of the crisis, Mr. Speaker, when the TUC and the CBI are united in writing to the Prime Minister saying that a Plan B must be found to protect workers, the economy and the Irish border. My question on Monday went unanswered. So will the Prime Minister now say what is her Plan B?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, as he knows, we are continuing to work to ensure that we can deliver Brexit for the British people and guarantee that we deliver Brexit for the British people. We have a deal which cancels our EU membership fee, which stops the EU making our laws, which gives us our own immigration policy, ends the common agricultural policy for good, ends the common fisheries policy for good. Other options don't do that. Other options would lead to delay, to uncertainty and risk never delivering Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, the only problem with the Prime Minister's answer is that her deal has been twice defeated in this House by, in one case, Mr. Speaker, the largest ever majority by which a government has lost a vote in our recorded parliamentary history. Reports today suggest that a former Conservative Prime Minister is telling Conservative MPs that pursuing a customs union with the EU is the best way of getting Brexit over the line. Does she agree with him, and will she be supporting any motions for a customs union this afternoon?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman, what we have negotiated, the government's deal negotiated with the European Union, delivers the benefits of a customs union while enabling us to have an independent free trade policy, to negotiate free trade agreements in our interests and not rely on Brussels to negotiate them for him. He used to stand up for independent trade policy. Now he wants a customs union. Now he wants to throw away the idea of an independent trade policy and leave Brussels negotiating for us. We want to negotiate our trade in our interests and the interests of people across this country.
She knows perfectly well that our policy is for a customs union in order to protect jobs, in order to protect society, and she will also know that the TUC and the CBI have called for a customs union as part of a deal. In fact, the letter wrote to all MPs yesterday saying a deal that delivers a customs union and strong alignment between the UK and the EU rules is the preferred outcome for the business community. So it's a bit strange when a Conservative Prime Minister says she doesn't want what the business community want. These are indeed strange times, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister say why she will not include a customs union in the options that will be discussed today?
Prime Minister.
Can I suggest to the right honourable gentleman that he doesn't just read the question that he thought of previously, but actually listens to the answer that I gave to his previous question. And I will repeat it again, because the right honourable gentleman stood on a platform to be able to do trade deals, to have an independent trade policy and to deliver Brexit. His policy on customs union breaks the first promise. He's never explained why he wants to abandon an independent trade policy, and his policy on a second referendum breaks his second promise. Whatever happened to straight talking on his politics?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to realise that she doesn't have a deal that's been supported by this House, and that our proposals for a customs union do give us alignment on workers' rights, consumer standards and environmental protection, and do not begin with a race to the bottom, which is what she and many on her front bench actually want. Earlier this week, Mr. Speaker, the Business Minister resigned from the government, saying the government's approach to Brexit was playing roulette with the lives and livelihoods of the vast majority of the people of this country. Why is she prepared to carry on risking jobs and industry in another attempt to yet again run down the clock and try to blackmail the MPs behind her into supporting a deal that's already been twice rejected?
Prime Minister.
Say to the right honourable gentleman, we have been negotiating in order to protect jobs. What he says about a race to the bottom is wrong. As he well knows, we have been working across this House. It is absolutely clear in the political declaration that we agree to not falling back in workers' rights, but also we are a government that has enhanced workers' rights. The UK... Party can never stand it when they are told that Conservatives have stood up for workers, because that's what the Conservative Party does. We've enhanced workers' rights. We stand up for workers with our tax cuts, with our national living wage and with higher employment.
In a straight question to the Prime Minister, she was unable to guarantee what's called dynamic alignment with European standards, and she knows full well that the Labour proposals are to use the EU standards as a baseline from which we would improve them, including giving workers full rights at work from day one of their employment and ending zero-hours contracts and many other things. In his resignation letter, Mr. Speaker, the Business Minister also said to the Prime Minister that he hoped she would now act in the national interest and enable Parliament this week to find a consensus negotiating position. If today or on Monday a consensus alternative plan emerges across the House, will the Prime Minister accept that decision of the House and accept it as the basis for the UK's negotiating position with the EU henceforward?
Prime Minister.
Well, gentlemen, the objective that we should all have is being able to guarantee. The objective we should all have is being able to deliver Brexit and guarantee delivering Brexit to the British people. And the right honourable gentleman stands there and asks me and raises this issue of workers' rights. We've been very clear about non-regression in relation to workers' rights and environmental standards. He shakes his head. It's in black and white in the political declaration that has been agreed. But we've also been clear. He ends his question, and I'm hearing the Shadow Trade Secretary is shouting from a sedentary position about the wishes about listening to Parliament. What we are going to do on workers' rights is say that actually no, we won't simply accept automatically what the European Union does. We will listen to Parliament and give Parliament a say in that. I thought he wanted Parliament to have a say in these things.
That sounds awfully like a recipe for regression away from those standards and damaging workers' rights. Mr. Speaker, after the two largest defeats ever in parliamentary history, surely the Prime Minister should be listening to Parliament. She didn't answer my question about whether or not an agreement reached in this House would become the negotiating position of the government. I think the House, and perhaps more importantly, the whole country, deserves to know the answer to that question. Mr. Speaker, this country is on hold while the government is in complete paralysis. The vital issues facing our country, from the devastation of public services to homelessness to knife crime, have been neglected. The Prime Minister is failing to deliver Brexit because she can't build a consensus, is unable to compromise and unable to reunite the country. Instead, she's stoking further divisions, she is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern. The Prime Minister faces, Mr. Speaker, a very clear choice. The one endorsed by the country and many of her own party: either listen and change course or go. Which is it to be?
Yep.
Prime Minister.
Can I just say, the right honourable gentleman raises the question of the indicative votes tonight. I actually answered that question in this House earlier this week. But he might want to talk to his shadow Brexit secretary, who's made clear that actually the Labour Party won't commit to supporting the result of any of the indicative votes tonight. And then he talks about what's happening in this country. Well, let's just look at what is going to be happening in this country next week. Nearly £1 billion extra for the police, £1.4 billion more available for local councils, £1.1 billion extra for our schools, another fuel duty freeze, another rise in national living wage, another tax cut. That's under the Conservatives. What would Labour give us? He wants to scrap Trident, he wants to pull out of NATO. Labour would give us capital flight, a run on the pound, a dropping living standards. The biggest threat to our standing in the world, to our defence and to our economy is sitting on the Labour front bench.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend Friend undertake to reform the government's online petition system, which currently accepts unverified signatures from across the world? This fundamental flaw can produce an inaccurate reflection of public opinion on important issues, such as revoking Article 50, and leaves our democracy potentially under threat from the manipulation from foreign state aggressors.
My honourable friends raised a very important issue, and can I just say that, like the traditional paper petition system, we do need to have an e-petition system that aims to strike a balance between allowing people to easily recognise their support, register their support for issues which are important to them, while discouraging dishonesty from taking place. I've been assured that the Government Digital Service have been constantly monitoring signing patterns to check for fraudulent activity, but I'm sure that my honourable friend will understand that I can't comment in more detail about the security measures that are taken, but petitions are subject to checks as part of due diligence.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure you'll want to join me and welcome the member of the 6th Royal Scot Reserves who are joining us in the gallery today, and to thank them for their service. Mr. Speaker, it is becoming increasingly clear that the cost this Prime Minister will pay to force her disastrous deal through is the price of her departure. Yet again, another Tory Prime Minister is willing to ride off into the sunset and saddle us with a crisis in the UK and an extreme right-wing Brexiteer coming into Downing Street. Does the Prime Minister feel no sense of responsibility for what she is about to do?
Gentlemen, it is my sense of responsibility and duty that has meant I have kept working to ensure that we deliver on the result of the British people.
Ian Blackford.
That's a quick answer. Mr. Speaker, let me help the Prime Minister. She can still change course. It is not too late. On Saturday, I joined opposition leaders and 1 million people to demand a second EU referendum. Mr. Speaker, 6 million people have signed a petition online demanding that the Prime Minister rethink her strategy. And today, this House will give her a way out, a chance to prevent disaster. Will the Prime Minister finally respect the will of Parliament, or will she continue to allow Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom to be held hostage by the extreme right wing of the Tory party and the DUP?
Prime Minister.
I'm interested that the right honourable gentleman joined the march for a second referendum. Last week his policy was revoking Article 50. Now his policy is having a second referendum. But let's just look at what the government is doing. What the government is doing is delivering on the vote that took place in the 2016 referendum. What the right honourable gentleman wants to do is to stay in the EU. And what would that mean? All the Scottish nationalists nod their heads and say they want to stay in the EU. What would that mean? That would mean staying in the Common Agricultural Policy, not in the interests of Scottish farmers. And that would mean staying in the Common Fisheries Policy, not in the interests of Scottish fishermen. It's Scottish Conservatives who are standing up for the interests of Scottish farmers.
Bill Wiggin!
Under my right honourable friend's government, 1 million more disabled people are in work. But I'm sure that she would like to do so much more. For example, can she get disabled access for Ledbury Station to save disabled passengers an extra 20-minute journey to Hereford and back so that they can simply get out of the train? The Access for All programme is too slow and disabled people need to go to and from work too.
First of all, can I thank him for highlighting the government's record in getting more disabled people, or helping more disabled people get into the workplace. We do want to tackle the injustices that are facing disabled people, and as he says, if we're going to enable disabled people to go as far as their talents will take them, we need to ensure they have access to work and are able to travel to that work as everybody else does, easily and conveniently and confidently. So our Access for All programme has got an additional £300 million of funding to upgrade historic station infrastructures. I understand Ledbury Station is being considered for part of that funding, and we expect to make an announcement shortly.
Chris Elmore!
Violent crime has risen by 19%. Robberies have risen by 17%, and we've all seen the devastating and tragic impact of the increases on knife crime in our communities. This is the reality of the Prime Minister's reckless cuts since 2010, with youth centres closed, police budgets slashed, and the closure of all early intervention services across the UK. Can I plead and beg with the Prime Minister to understand that we need more real investment before any more lives are lost?
Prime Minister!
I know that South Wales Police are actually getting an increase in their budget in 2019-20, over 2018. And I would simply say to the honourable gentleman that we have protected police spent funding since 2015, in direct contrast to a Labour Party that suggested that police funding should be cut by 10%.
Jack Lepresti!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, when I've asked on previous occasions why we cannot stop this ongoing politically motivated witch hunt of our Northern Ireland veterans, the answer has always been that we cannot interfere with the judicial process. But surely the Good Friday Agreement was entirely predicated on interfering with the judicial process, letting convicted terrorists out of prison, royal pardons, providing letters of comfort to terrorists on the run. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have a son who serves in the Royal Artillery. Gunner Michael Lepresti, the fourth member of its family generation to do so. So can my right honourable friend assure him, or reassure him, that when he goes on an operational tour, which he's very keen to do so, that if something goes wrong, officers lose control of the situation, terrible mistakes are made, that in 50 years' time he won't be dragged out of bed at 6 in the morning, taken to a police station, questioned and then charged with murder?
Minister!
First of all, can I say to my honourable friend, can I congratulate Gunner Lepresti and commend him for his service that he is giving to our country. We have been clear in looking at the issue of Northern Ireland and the legacy in Northern Ireland that the current system is not working well for anyone. And on that specific, we recognise around 3,500 people were killed in the Troubles, the vast majority murdered by terrorists. And many of those cases do require further investigation, including the deaths of hundreds of members of the security forces. And that system does need to change to provide better outcomes for victims and survivors of the Troubles. But we are working on proposals across government to take those proposals forward. And of course, we are looking constantly at making sure we can give maximum confidence to those of our brave servicemen and women who day in and day out put their lives on the line for us.
Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, we all know that policing has changed significantly over the last 50 years, from cyber fraud and bullying to the recent tragic increases in knife crime. And on the way, the public have lost trust in politicians when it comes to policing. There is a way, though, to restore that trust, Prime Minister. Will you commit to setting up a Police Royal Commission so that facts and evidence, rather than political spin, prepare our police to properly tackle 21st century crime?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that the nature of crime is changing, or we're seeing new types of crime being introduced, and the police need to have the ability, the resources, the understanding of how to best deal with those. That's why, actually, I would say to the honourable gentleman, I don't think we need a Royal Commission to do this. One of the things I did as Home Secretary was to set up the College of Policing. One of the points of the College of Policing is to ensure that it is identifying new types of crime, it is identifying how best to deal with all types of crime, so that we have the confidence that our police are using the best tools available to them.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an unlicensed airfield, Esshot, in my constituency, a small business continuing a long history of general aviation on that site ever since the airbase was built during World War II as home for one of the largest Spitfire bases. Mr. Speaker, we have a neighbours' dispute threatening the safety of the runway, but the CAA are refusing to assist the owners to enforce safety orders. Can the Prime Minister please help us to stop a totally avoidable disaster?
Can I say to my honourable friend, obviously she's raised a very important issue, and safety in aviation is absolutely paramount. I understand my honourable friend has raised this issue directly with the Aviation Minister, who's looking at it as a matter of urgency and looking at it very carefully, and we're hoping for a positive response and a positive resolution for all parties involved. The Minister will be writing to my honourable friend as soon as possible, but I also know that the Civil Aviation Authority has been in contact with all parties involved. She's right to raise this issue, and it's an important one, and urgent action is being taken.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The condition ME affects approximately 25,000 children in the UK. When the parents of these children make the extremely difficult decision to remove their sick child from a programme of graded exercise therapy, many of these families have child protection proceedings triggered against them. So in the midst of this Brexit chaos, will the Prime Minister commit to looking into this issue to ensure that loving parents caring for extremely sick children are not threatened with having that child taken into care?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady,
Prime Minister,
she's raised an issue that I wasn't aware of previously, and I'd be very happy to look into it and to make sure the responsible ministers look into it.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
Following the result of the referendum, the Government has the responsibility of negotiating withdrawal, transition and then future negotiations. Up to now, that has not passed Parliament because of three incompatible groups surrounding the Government. Those who want to stay in, those who want to be out, and the Labour Party's vague policy, which even their leader doesn't agree with. Can I say to the Prime Minister that most people in the country want her to succeed and the deal to go through so we get the best possible advantage from future arrangements?
My honourable friend, I think he is absolutely right. That is the message I consistently get from people across the country, that we actually want to deliver Brexit. There's a way to do that, a way to guaranteeing delivering Brexit, and that's supporting the deal.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents are very pleased that it's been decided that the UK's first space launch facility will be in the north of my constituency. Very pleased because, not least, this gives us a great opportunity to redeploy the very considerable skills which we have at Dounreay in Caithness. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this is a splendid business opportunity, not just for my constituency, not just for the UK, but in terms of launching and building and launching rockets for countries in Europe and the rest of the world who will never have their own launch facilities?
Minister.
Can I first of all say to the honourable gentleman, I'm a little disappointed he didn't give me another invitation to come to his the hotel in his constituency, but there we are. I thought maybe I might be able to look at the spaceport from the hotel windows, but he raises a very important point, and this is a significant development, the development of this spaceport. It will indeed be good for local business. It will indeed be good for local jobs. It's skilled jobs, an important area of employment. But as he says, it will give opportunities for the UK to offer these services to others across Europe who are not able to provide those services for themselves. I think this is good for our economy, it's good for his local economy, it's good for his constituents and the UK as a whole.
Kirsten Hare.
Professions, those in the armed forces don't get to choose where they are stationed, but those in Scotland are undoubtedly delighted to serve there. Over 7,000 of our armed forces personnel in Scotland are penalised by Nicola Sturgeon's In my view, that is simply unfair. So will the Prime Minister commit to extend the compensation that the UK Government paid to armed forces based in Scotland last year for another year? Because, Prime Minister, we need to send a very clear signal that the Scottish Government are prepared to penalise those in our armed forces personnel, but it's this Conservative UK Government that will always ensure those that put their life on the line for our country will come first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all say that I would like to pay tribute particularly to everyone stationed at RM Condor in my honourable friend's constituency. She is absolutely right about those brave men and women across our armed forces who put their lives on the line for us. And she is also right that what has happened with the SNP's tax hike, both this year and next year, is it unfairly hits a majority of our brave and loyal service personnel based in Scotland. This leaves thousands of them out of pocket, and this is wrong. So we will therefore again be providing financial mitigation payments to those negatively impacted for the tax year 2019-20 by these Scottish income tax hikes, and by that Scottish income tax being higher than the UK, and a single financial mitigation payment will be made retrospectively in 2020. The Scottish Government may ignore our armed forces. We stand by them.
Diana Johnson!
Mr. Speaker, no matter what happens with Brexit, I'm sure we can all agree that we need a new industrial renaissance in the north. And with the Northern Powerhouse and Yorkshire devolution stalling, isn't it about time that we got the same priority and attention for the Humber Docklands as has been given to the London Docklands for the last 40 years?
Can I say to the Prime Minister? I'm absolutely clear. When I became Prime Minister, I said we wanted a country that works for everyone. Our modern industrial strategy is exactly aimed at ensuring that we are developing across parts of the country that need that and that perhaps feel that they have been left behind. But she talks about the investment in the North and Northern Powerhouse. Northern Powerhouse is not stalling. We have made significant investment into the Northern Powerhouse, significant investment into infrastructure in the North, and significant investment in the deals that we have negotiated across the North to ensure that the benefits of the economic prosperity under this government are felt across every part of our country.
Steve Brine!
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A very large number of my constituents, Prime Minister, voted Remain in 2016. Many voted Leave and some weren't old enough to take part. They all have a view. What I think they and their MP overwhelmingly want now is a clear desire to leave the EU with a deal, so we exit the EU in a safe way that protects our economy and their jobs and just lets us move on. In the long term, we want a deep and special relationship with the European Union, while embracing the opportunities of the 168 countries who are not part of it. So just so I'm clear, and just between us if she likes, before I vote this evening, can the Prime Minister confirm that none of this is contrary to the manifesto that she and I stood on 2 years ago?
Prime Minister!
First of all, can I thank my honourable friend for the excellent work he did as a minister. He was an exemplary minister, and I'm sorry that he felt necessary to resign from the government. He's raised the issues of a deep and special partnership with the European Union. We do indeed want that. We also, as he said, want to embrace the opportunities of the 168 countries who are not part of it with an independent trade policy. And that is precisely what is delivered by the deal which the government has negotiated with the European Union. And we can guarantee what he asks about, which is to leave the European Union, to do it with a deal, to do it in a safe way, by ensuring that the deal is supported and we leave the European Union as set out by the EU Council on the 22nd of May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Newcastle voted 50.7% to 49.3% to remain. It divided our city, and I was determined we should not have to vote again. But this is a complete shambles. Parliament gridlocked, government paralysed, businesses stalled, jobs lost, households stockpiling, our global reputation trashed, and the Prime Minister incapable of holding her cabinet together, never mind the country. Will she not consider the possibility that she is making a terrible mistake? If
the Honourable Lady wants to ensure that we are able to deliver on the overall vote of the referendum, to do that in a way that protects jobs, that protects our union and protects our security, and to do that in a way that is orderly, that guarantees Brexit for the British people. She said she didn't want a second referendum. If we are going to guarantee Brexit, and I suggest to the Honourable Lady that she gets behind the deal, and then we can guarantee that Brexit.
Sir William Cash.
Two days ago, I asked the Prime Minister if, as absolutely required under the Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual, she sought the Attorney-General's advice relating to her authorisation of the extension of the exit date, and would she publish this advice. She refused to answer. Distinguished lawyers and former judges are convinced that the so-called international agreement is unlawful. I sent her a letter about this yesterday. The Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments has not yet considered the regulations at all. The motion to approve the regulations come before the House this evening. The European Scrutiny Committee and the Joint Committee will need to see the advice of the Attorney-General before the end of today, when the motion is going to be received by the House. Will she produce the advice of the Attorney-General? Where is it? And will she withdraw the motion this evening?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to my honourable friend, it is a matter of international law that the date of the UK's exit has been changed. The purpose of the SI this evening is to reflect that change in domestic law. Should the SI not pass, there would be severe uncertainty for citizens and businesses. There would be contradictory provisions between EU rules and UK rules, but it would be clear that the date of our exit had changed. The House of Commons voted to seek an extension to Article 50. An agreement was reached with the European Union Council in relation to that. He's raised the question of commencement order with me previously. The commencement order is due to come into place on the date that we leave the European Union. Now, my honourable friend, I know, wants to leave the European Union, and we can, of course, leave the European Union if, I dare suggest to my honourable friend, he cares to back the deal and we can guarantee leaving.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, The Guardian reported that 15 Tory councillors who were suspended for Islamophobia or racism had been quietly reinstated. The Conservative Party has so far failed to quell fears that they are in denial about Islamophobia. Since I asked the Prime Minister about this in June 2018, there has been no concrete action. Will the Prime Minister instruct her party chairman to respond to the 3 letters I have sent him on this subject? And when will the Tory party adopt the APPG British Muslims definition of Islamophobia, as the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, the Mayor of London and councils across the country have done?
Prime Minister.
The honourable gentleman, that the Conservative Party has a complaints process which deals with complaints of Islamophobia and complaints of any other sort against councillors or other members of the party. It is absolutely clear that discrimination or abuse of any kind is wrong. We take action against where there are cases of discrimination or abuse. He says we haven't acted since, I think, 2018 when he raised this issue. We have acted on cases that any allegations that are brought before the party chairman takes this very seriously, and we will continue to do so.
That's not true.
John Barron.
Most of us want a good deal, prefer a good deal to no deal at all. But may I urge the Prime Minister to ignore the dire forecast should we leave on WTO terms. It is these same people who predicted doom and gloom in 2016 if we voted to leave. Since then, we've had record low unemployment, record high investment and record manufacturing output. They were wrong then, they're wrong now, and by doing so, we could be leaving as per the legal default position of Article 50, which is without a deal.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, he references leaving on WTO terms. Of course, what I want to be able to do, and what I think is right, and what the government considers right for the United Kingdom, is for us to be able to negotiate trade agreements with countries around the world that give us a better operation with those countries rather than just the WTO basis, but also to be able to negotiate that good trade deal with the European Union. That's what we want to see, a good trade deal with our nearest trading neighbours and opportunities for good free trade agreements around the rest of the world.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask the Prime Minister a very important question as well. With 1,152 people living with dementia in my constituency of Strangford alone, and with the cost of society across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to be £30 billion by the year 2021, what commitment can the Prime Minister give to increase dementia research into new avenues of discovery that could potentially lead to a cure or treatment? And would the Prime Minister commit government annually to just 1% of the societal cost of dementia for research?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that he has raised a very important issue. He cited the number of his constituents who are living with dementia. That there will be people across all our constituencies and increasing numbers who are living with dementia. And that's why we have committed to delivering our Dementia 2020 challenge in full. And that is supporting research. He specifically referenced research. It's supporting research into dementia. The UK research community is also playing a significant role in the global effort to try to find a cure or a major disease-modifying treatment by 2025. We've committed to double spending on research in dementia by 2020. That's the equivalent to around £60 million per annum, and we're on track to meet this. And as he has referenced in his question, much of this investment is indeed for research to better understand the nature of dementia, to inform the development of future treatments and to find ways actually to prevent the onset of the condition. If we can prevent the condition, of course, that is the best route to take. But meanwhile, we look to see what better treatment we can provide for those with this condition.
Mike Wood. Mr. Speaker, 30 years ago, Margaret Thatcher told the UN General Assembly that the threat from global warming needed an equivalent response from the whole world. What progress is being made on reducing greenhouse gas emissions that contribute towards man-made climate change?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this very important issue. What I would also say to the Honourable Gentleman is that he has reminded people, actually, that it was a Conservative Prime Minister who was one of the first world leaders to actually raise this issue of climate change and put it on the international agenda. He's asked me about some of the changes that have taken place. Between 2010 and 2017, we've reduced the UK's domestic greenhouse gas emissions by 23%. Nearly 50% of UK electricity came from low-carbon sources in 2018, and UK CO2 emissions have fallen for 6 years in a row. That is just a few of the achievements that we have under a record as a government. But of course, we continue to work internationally to help deal with this issue, and that's why we believe it is so important to adhere to and remain part of the Paris Climate Change Agreement.
Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Prime Minister will join with me in welcoming the signing yesterday of the Heads of Terms of Agreement on the Belfast City regional deal, the first city deal in Northern Ireland, which is estimated to bring about 20,000 new jobs, £350 million of investment by the government, and a lot of extra investment by local councils and the private sector. Will she confirm that she will do everything in her power in the absence of devolved government to ensure that the civil service who signed on behalf of Northern Ireland, that there will be no impediment to the good progress of that city deal, which has been welcomed right across the community in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point, which is about the benefits that these city deals can bring. And those benefits are considerable, bringing together both government at all levels and the private sector to provide in those city deals. I absolutely take the point that he makes, that in the absence of devolved government, we need to make sure there is no impediment to moving ahead with that city deal as fast as possible, and will commit to ensuring that that does indeed take place.
Andrew Slew.
The Prime Minister knows of the huge improvements to the quality of clinical care brought about by the Getting It Right First Time programme authored by Professor Tim Briggs, who I brought to see her and indeed to see Gordon Brown as well. Given the importance our constituents place on a good service from their local GP practice, will the Prime Minister ensure that the general practice rollout of Getting It Right First Time is speeded up so that the excellent practice available in places like Worksop, Whitstable and Peterborough can be made available to all of our constituents?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend not only for his question but for actually bringing Professor Tim Briggs to see me. And when Professor Briggs came to see me, he did raise this issue of spreading this of getting it right first and spreading it beyond hospital consultants and into GP practices. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We should make sure that we do that. We want to make sure that the absolutely best practice is adopted by GP practices across the whole country. That's for the benefits of all our constituents.
Chris Bryant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Skin cancer is on the rise in the United Kingdom, and as many members know only too well, it can kill, though when detected very early or early enough, the NHS is able to perform absolute miracles, thank God. Isn't it time, though, in the UK in particular, that we had a major public health campaign now to persuade people to check out their body to see whether they've got any suspicious moles, to take those suspicious moles to the doctors, to avoid the sun in the midday heat, to cover their children with at least factor 30, and to make sure that we can save lives? Because if we get it right, if people are in doubt, they should check it out, and if they do, we can save lives.
Prime Minister has raised a very important point, and he speaks on this issue from personal experience. And he is absolutely right. We need to ensure that people are aware of the dangers and aware of the signs that they need to take notice of and actually take to their doctors, because lives can be saved. The Health Secretary has heard the passionate case which the Right Honourable Gentleman has made in relation to public health information on this, and I'm sure my Right Honourable friend will be happy to meet him to discuss this further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that the American ambassador is enjoying his visit here today as much as he enjoyed his visit to North East Lincolnshire last Friday. When I was able to join him at Young Seafoods in Grimsby, when we enjoyed some of the finest seafood possible. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that Brexit increases the opportunities of further trade to build on the already trading relationship we have with the United States?
We hope the Ambassador's palate was satisfied, and I dare say we'll be hearing about it if it wasn't. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I assure my honourable friend, having recently visited North East Lincolnshire, that we all enjoy our visits to North East Lincolnshire and seeing the many opportunities that there are there across the economy. But of course, he's talked about seafood and fishing opportunities. But he's absolutely right. Leaving the European Union and making sure as we do so we have the ability to have our own independent trade policy means that we will be able to have those free trade agreements around the world, including with the United States. And the United States has, as we've heard on many occasions, we are both keen on both sides of the Atlantic to be able to pursue that free trade agreement.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the many tragedies associated with this Brexit chaos is the huge distraction it is from other key priorities like the climate catastrophe. Just this week we learned that global climate emissions have hit their highest ever level, and in her answer to the gentleman opposite, she only gave half the story. The other half is that the UK is way off track to meet our long-term climate targets, and our consumption emissions are down just 4%. Will she support growing calls for a Green New Deal, a green transformation of our economy, creating hundreds of thousands of good quality jobs in constituencies up and down this country?
Prime Minister.
To the honourable lady, first of all, she should, I think, do more to welcome the action that this government has taken on this issue. Secondly, she will have noted that clean growth is one of the challenges that we have set in our modern industrial strategy. For a long time, people used to say that it wasn't possible to deal with climate change and environmental issues without damaging the economy. That is absolutely wrong. Actually, what we do in clean growth is a very good opportunity for us to take economic benefits. And when I visited North East Lincolnshire and went to Ørsted, I saw the work that they're doing in offshore wind fields, which is making a huge impact in relation to renewable energy in the United Kingdom. And we stand, and I'm pleased that this government is looking to the opportunity of actually hosting COP26 here in the UK.
Order. Helen Jones.
Speaker, on a point of order, the honourable member for Erewash recently made in Prime Minister's questions some allegations about the petitions system. Can I point out that the petition to revoke Article 50 had 96% of its signatures from the UK, and that the Government Digital Service has in place both automated and manual systems to detect bots and other fraudulent activity. And, Mr. Speaker, can you do anything to ensure that if members wish to undermine what is the most successful parliamentary petition system in the world, they do so on the basis of facts and find out those facts from the committee before they raise them in this chamber?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady for her point of order. I don't think it is for me to advise on the identification of facts, which I imagine would be an extremely lengthy, possibly painful, and conceivably unproductive exercise. However, I don't treat the honourable lady's point with levity. I will not arbitrate between the honourable lady and the honourable member for Erewash, and no one would expect me to do so. What I would like to do, however, is to acknowledge the outstanding work of the Petitions Committee under the august and respected chairmanship of the honourable lady, and to emphasise that the staff who support the committee are staff who display exemplary professionalism. And I don't imagine, to be fair, that the honourable member for Erewash would cavil at that at all, and I don't think that was her point. But I want to put it on the record: they're dedicated, hard-working and extremely skilled staff discharging a public duty on behalf of Parliament in the public interest. Yes, of course, I will come to the honourable gentleman. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Speaker, in order to come into the House of Commons today, coming from the tube, one has to walk past a large poster saying death, and then underneath it the words "to democracy." Now, it's not clear how those protesters want to carry out their death wish, whether it's to democracy or to those of us who are elected as part of democracy, or to members of staff who work for us as democratically elected staff. But, Mr. Speaker, there can be no place in our public life for intimidation of members of Parliament or their staff. And so, whilst we respect the right to free protest, can we ask again to look at the way in which the right to freedom of speech versus intimidation of those in public life is being carried out and protected around this Parliament?
The honourable lady raises an important point, and I respect the force of her observation and the sincerity that underlies it. There is, of course, a delicate balance between freedom of speech on the one hand and a safe space for parliamentarians and for those who report our proceedings on the other. As the honourable lady, who is an extremely assiduous participant in the chamber, will attest, this matter has been raised before, and no harm in it being raised again. Considerable necessity, no doubt, for doing so in the chamber. And I have made the point that we in this House have made representations to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner and had regular contact with Cressida Dick and her senior officers in order to make the case for a more proactive policing approach of a character and on a scale that will protect people going about their daily business, either as parliamentarians or as journalists, or indeed as members of the public who fall into neither of those categories. I know that the honourable lady will understand when I say, and I do not say it with an ounce of flippancy, I say it because I think it's right, that, and I don't think she'd suggest otherwise, I can't be the poster policeman. It's not for me to police posters. It's not for any member of Parliament to police posters. And I accept that there is an ambiguity about the poster to which she has just referred, but I can acknowledge that it may be regarded by some as intimidating. Moreover, many of the threats to people have in particular been threats to female colleagues and female journalists, and we need to take careful account of that. I will relay the Honourable Lady's remarks to Eric Hepburn, the Parliamentary Security Director, and as necessary we'll have further discussions with the police. I will come to the honourable gentleman, but I did promise the honourable member for Shipley, and it would seem unkind to deny him a moment longer. Point of order, Mr. Philip Davis.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport, who was in his place, came and made a very welcome visit to the Shipley constituency. Unfortunately, he didn't have the courtesy to let me know that he was coming beforehand. This follows hot on the heels, Mr. Speaker, of the Shadow Chancellor coming to visit the Shipley constituency, who also didn't have the courtesy to tell me that he was coming to visit my constituency either. Now don't get me wrong, Mr. Speaker, they're very welcome to visit the Shipley constituency, and anything that draws attention to the fact that my Labour opponent is a hardcore Corbynista who will be a loyalist to a Marxist government in her ideal world is very much to be welcome, and hopefully next time they'll bring Owen Jones and Eddie Izzard with them as well. But would you not agree, Mr. Speaker, that they should at least have the courtesy to let me know before they're actually planning on making a political visit to my constituency?
Yes, I quite understand members' desire to visit the constituency of the honourable gentleman. I say that not merely in the abstract, but on the strength of my very agreeable personal experience. As the honourable gentleman knows, I visited his constituency with him to speak to school students some time ago, and I positively salivated over the experience. And so I can quite understand why others would want to visit Shipley, but no, members should do each other the courtesy of prior notification. This is a matter now regularly being raised by members on both sides of the House, and I hope there will not be further recurrences of discourtesy. Yes, very well. Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I further to the point of order raised by the Honourable Lady for Chelmsford? And I see that the Honourable gentleman for Cardiff and South Penarth has wanted to raise it, and I suspect it will be the same. We have both, as you know, Mr. Speaker, following an incident last week with the Honourable Lady, we have had further incidents outside that entrance to the tube station. And it's not simply posters, though that is bad enough. It is members of our staff being intimidated in an area that is now very much confined. Further to that, a member of the lobby told me that when she left this place at 11 o'clock on Monday night, she went past people who were injecting Class A drugs. There was then an incident outside the entrance itself where the gates are into the tube station. In short, Mr. Speaker, a number of us have done exactly what you have asked to do. We have raised all of this with the senior police commander, with the gentleman that I've forgotten his name, but with him directly. That's what the honourable gentleman for Cardiff South and Penarth did in an email, because I was copied into it. Fine words, Mr. Speaker, no action. And it's not acceptable. What is happening outside that entrance into this place is a serious threat to the safety of everybody that uses that entrance.
I think the fairest thing I can say to the Right Honourable Lady, whose extremely alarming personal experience lends weight to her observation, is that I might perhaps usefully convene a meeting with our advisers to be attended by those members who are airing their concerns today. I think that's the fairest thing I can say. The Leader of the House herself may wish to attend that meeting. I obviously can't resolve the issue here and now, but so that we're all in one room, and preferably at the end of the conversation in the same place, what better way but to have a meeting sooner rather than later. I hope she will accept that I can't pursue it further now, but I hope that that is a constructive approach. And I'm not sure how much further there is, but Cardiff South and Penarth. Mr Stephen Doughty, point of order.
Mr Speaker, it was just to confirm to you that I, in fact, spoke directly to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner yesterday after she appeared at the Home Affairs Committee and raised these concerns directly with her. But it is, unfortunately, not being dealt with to satisfaction. We've raised it now with the Home Secretary as well and with parliamentary security officials. It is staff that's being threatened. It is members that are being threatened. But can I add, Mr Speaker, that the behaviour of some individuals, particularly on social media, with sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic language directed at members of Parliament because of the ways that they vote and the opinions they hold has to be dealt with, and there is a huge responsibility on the social media companies to take action on this as well. It's not just posters and it's not just the physical threats of intimidation.
I accept that the abuse is wider and must be addressed. Indeed, I do, and I thank the honourable gentleman for saying what he said. A point of order, Angela Regal.
Mr Speaker, and I ask this question to seek your guidance because what I'm going to refer to, I think, is a novel thing. But it's become clear that the government has been buying paid Facebook ads to send out to all of our constituents, presumably, the Prime Minister's views, putting herself on the side of the people and setting the people against MPs. Now, clearly Facebook hasn't been available as a way to do this until recently. But what we have here now is government money being spent so that the executive can actually say controversial and potentially dangerous things about the legislature. Can you, Mr Speaker, give me any guidance on how we might pursue this? Because it seems to me a very alarming new trend.
What I would say to the right honourable lady is that if she were to have an allegation of contempt to make, that would have to be made in writing to me. More widely, and I'm not insensitive to her concern, I think I would need to look at the specifics, and rather than shoot from the hip now and offer a response which may be ill-informed and unsatisfactory, I would rather offer a response that is well-informed and satisfactory. The route to that might be an exchange between us in writing, and I look forward to the receipt of her letter. Yes, indeed. I'll come to the honourable gentleman, of course. Point of order, Marshal de Cordova.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Minister for Health, Work and Disability resigned. To date, the Prime Minister has yet to appoint a new minister to this post. But given the strategic importance and the utter chaos within the Department for Work and Pensions, there are currently 7 reviews into disabled people being wrongly denied social security and an assessment framework for employment and support allowance and PIP in utter crisis, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, these are important issues, and I'd like to seek your guidance as to how I can go about in being able to hold this government and the DWP to account.
The answer is by persistence. Persist, persist, persist. Pose questions. Press the case. Push, I say to the honourable lady, the point of view that you wish to express. This is a very, very serious matter, and I wouldn't dream of treating it otherwise. The honourable lady is speaking up, as indeed the Minister responsible for these matters would be expected to speak up for the interests of disabled people. However, I hope she will not take it amiss if I say I have a considerable number of matters on my plate. However, ministerial reshuffles are not amongst my responsibilities, and I say thankfully so. And I rather think the House would echo me in saying thankfully those are not a matter for the Speaker. Point of order. Well, I will come to the honourable gentleman. Yes, I did say. Yeah, point of order, Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The House will shortly move on to discuss the business motion, which will, if it is passed, will then govern the conduct of the indicative votes this afternoon. The business motion says, Mr. Speaker, members may record their votes on each question under arrangements made by you, sir. So, can I take it that at some point, fairly soon, you will explain to the House what those arrangements are and how it will work? And can I just ask you specifically, can you just scotch a rumour that was circulating this morning, but is probably inaccurate, that there will be some kind of secret ballot and that constituents will not know how their MPs have voted? So could you explain how, because it won't presumably be in Hansard, constituents will be able to tell how each of their members of Parliament has voted specifically on each of the motions that you select?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point of order. I will indeed be making a statement on that matter, or an announcement to the House, in a timely way. Of course, it is for the House to agree or not, as the case may be, to a business of the House motion. However, insofar as the right honourable gentleman is perturbed by the prospect of secret and thereafter to remain secret votes, I think I can put the right honourable gentleman's mind at rest. There is no such plan. And I hope that reassures the right honourable gentleman. He has a sunny countenance in the circumstances, and I think we should be grateful for that. Point of order, Mr Alex Cunningham.
Mr Speaker, on the 20th of February at PMQs, I highlighted the decision by the Tees Valley Mayor to spend £90 million of taxpayers' money buying the loss-making Durham Tees Valley Airport, when local people in most parts of the area can't get a bus home after 6:30 in the evening. I asked if she could help them out. She answered, claiming the bus service had been considerably expanded across the Midlands and the North. But according to a letter from the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Transport outlining the statistics, this is most certainly not the case. The Prime Minister may have inadvertently misled the House. Is there anything you can do to encourage a Minister to come to the dispatch box to correct the record and acknowledge that the vast increase in bus services suggested by the Prime Minister simply hasn't materialised?
Well, gentleman, to whom I'm grateful for giving me advance notice of his intention to raise this point of order, is that responsibility for the veracity of what is said in the Chamber is that of each individual member, including members of the executive branch up to the highest level. If a minister reckons to have made a mistake, it is the responsibility of that member to correct the record. I'm not aware of any imminent intention on the part of the Prime Minister to correct the record, but knowing the perspicacity of the honourable gentleman and his tendency to focus his beady eye on the activities of government, I feel sure they will be looking out for what he thinks is the required correction. Whether he will look out to his advantage or whether he will be disappointed remains to be seen. I will come lastly to the honourable gentleman, but point of order, Mr Peter Bone.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker, and this point of order about the future business today, and I seek your guidance, which is a genuine point of order, though it may seem trivial to other people. We are, I think, in unique circumstances, and it's the first time that a business on a House motion, in my time here, will not be moved by whoever's the leader of the House at the dispatch box. I understand the right honourable member for West Dorset will move the business statement. The only way he was allowed to move that, be in that position, was the fact that he had hundreds of votes from opposition benches and 30 from these benches. Now, I'm sitting on Her Majesty's government's benches, and I support Her Majesty's government, well, at least most of the time. But there is a serious point here, sir. And if I can
I was rather enjoying listening to the honourable gentleman for Wellingborough talking about his support for the government. And I thought that this was something about which I ought to learn more and be educated. The honourable gentleman.
And the point is, I assume, sir, that the business of the House motion will not be moved from the dispatch box. I understand that point. But surely the right honourable member for West Dorset should at least move it from those benches which put him in the place to do it. And that is a serious point, sir. Otherwise, do I have to move to those benches to speak against it?
The honourable gentleman has raised his point with some force and insistence. However, the right honourable gentleman, the member for West Dorset, is just that. The right honourable gentleman, the member for West Dorset. That constituency is represented by the right honourable member who, for the vast bulk of his career, and we came into the House together, has voted with the government. In recent times, somewhat to his chagrin or even distress, he has felt unable to do so. However, he is making his case today as a constituency member of Parliament, and he sits on the government benches. If he were to perambulate to the other side, it would be regarded at the very least as deuced odd. Point of order, Mr Daniel Zeichner.
Speaker, further to my honourable friend for Stockton North's point of order earlier about the suggestion from the Prime Minister that there were 10,000 new bus routes in the Midlands of the North. For those of us who follow transport issues, that was quite surprising. I'd seek your guidance, Mr Speaker, on how we could get on the record the actual figures from the Department for Transport, which are that there have been 13,279 routes registered and 13,153 routes withdrawn, meaning there are actually only 126 new routes in that period of time. I'd be grateful if the Speaker could explain to me how that could be put on the record.
Well, as the honourable gentleman well knows, and he comes from a very academic, rather high-brow, intellectual constituency, and the honourable lady, the member for Bristol East, observes from a sedentary position he is one, meaning high-brow, intellectual, academic. He has found his own salvation. He's got it on the record. And I feel sure that copies of the official report will be veritably winging their way to his Cambridge constituents ere long, so they can note his prodigious efforts on their behalf. If there are no further points of order, we come now, the honourable gentleman, member for Stones, being a most patient fellow, we come now to the presentation of Bill Sir William Cash.
House of Commons Precedence of Government Business European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 5th of April, sir.
Friday the 5th of April. Thank you. Would 10-minute rule motion. Ruth George.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg leave be given to bring in a bill to make it an offence to use a sky lantern and for connected purposes, the Sky Lanterns Prohibitions Bill. Mr Speaker, last summer, when after an unprecedented heatwave, a spate of wildfires was raging around the moorland of High Peak, I was shocked to discover that an American company, the Lights Fest Company, were promoting a Sky Lantern Festival at a venue on the moors above Buxton. Considering that a sky lantern comprises a paper lantern and a candle, this company was selling tickets at £20 or £30 each for thousands of people to release naked flames across those tinder-dry moors. At the same time, our fire service in Derbyshire and hundreds of firefighters from Greater Manchester and further afield, park rangers, farmers, gamekeepers and our military were battling dozens of moorland fires, putting their own safety at risk, and I paid tribute to them. And although our fire service, our local councils, the Peak District National Park and I all objected to the Sky Lantern Festival, as it was organised on private land, we had no authority to prevent its taking place. So I wrote to the Lights Fest Company to set out the local fire situation and to ask them to cancel the event, and Derbyshire Fire Service did the same. But neither the Chief Fire Officer nor I received a response. In the meantime, local people set up an online petition which quickly gathered almost 10,000 signatures. And at that point, fortunately, the venue refused to host the event any longer, so it was finally cancelled with just days to go. But, Mr Speaker, it cannot be right that a company can organise a dangerous event such as this that we have no jurisdiction to prevent. And it's not just on dry moorland that sky lanterns are a problem. They've caused significant fires in recent years, most notably at Smethwick in 2013, where over 200 firefighters tackled a fire in a tyre depot that lasted for 3 days, caused £6 million worth of damage and injured 16 firefighters, 3 of whom needed hospital treatment. But had it not been for CCTV capturing the sight of that sky lantern descending onto those tyres, we wouldn't have known that that was almost certainly the cause of the inferno. In 2013, following this incident, a report was produced by DEFRA and the Welsh Government, which concluded that the fire risk associated with the use of sky lanterns is significant. In theory, sky lanterns should remain airborne for as long as they are filled with hot air and should only fall back down when the flame goes out. However, in practice, this is not always the case, and therefore sky lanterns can be a significant fire hazard. A survey of fire and rescue services found there had been 8 wildfires between 2008 and 2011 in Dorset caused by lanterns, and 1 in Northumberland which took 20 firefighters 4 hours to extinguish. The report also found there are risks to aviation, because when airborne, sky lanterns pose a possible safety risk due to possible ingestion into engines, and the Civil Aviation Authority said between 2011 and 2012 there were 48 incidents reported due to sky lanterns and helium balloons. They also pose a significant risk to the proper and effective operation of coastal rescue services, particularly red sky lanterns being mistaken for distress flares. The RSPCA and NFU are particularly concerned about the injuries to animals caused by sky lanterns, which can result in a long and painful death. And the RSPCA have reported numerous incidents, including a foal which had to be put to sleep after his legs were so badly injured from bolting through a fence, having been terrified by a lantern coming down, and a barn owl which died from having been entangled in a lantern frame. So the RSPCA have said that, given our remit, the RSPCA's focus regarding sky lanterns is the damage they can do to an animal's welfare, yet a ban on their use would also have wider social benefits, chiefly enhancing community safety and reducing fire risk, whilst reducing potential problems faced by coastal rescue services and the aviation sector. The NFU has long called for a total ban on sky lanterns, which pose dangers and nuisance to the farm animals and our countryside. They're a danger to livestock. Animals panic when confronted with an unusual sight like a sky lantern. Poultry may smother together, leading to suffocation, and other animals may bolt, causing injury. The sky lanterns often leave behind sharp objects, such as the metal or bamboo fragment, which can injure livestock either by direct contact or through ingesting the debris. Sky lanterns also pose a significant risk to property, crops and livestock, and they're a littering nuisance, particularly where there's been a mass release, and causes a lot of debris for farmers to clear. For these reasons, the NFU wholeheartedly support a total ban on their use. But, Mr. Speaker, over 200,000 sky lanterns are sold each year in the UK. Following the Smethwick fire and the DEFRA report, an industry code of conduct said that sky lanterns should be of design and construction to ensure that they only fall back to the ground when the cell flame is extinguished, and that once the lantern has landed, any impact on animals or the environment is minimised. But with a paper construction and a naked flame, no design can guarantee it will work as designed in any weather condition. Each sky lantern should be accompanied by warnings and instructions for use, not to launch them in an inappropriate location or unsuitable weather conditions, or in any manner that results in damage to persons or property that may make you liable for criminal charges or civil claims for damages. But in spite of this guidance, we are still seeing problems caused by sky lanterns and their promotion by companies seemingly heedless of this guidance. Last summer's events showed the need to prevent the use of sky lanterns. The Chief Fire Officer for Derbyshire has stated that last summer's wildfires resulted in devastation to the natural landscape, resources from across the UK Fire and Rescue Service were deployed for several weeks tackling these fires at great cost to the UK taxpayer. As a Chief Fire Officer leading a service that's main aims are to protect our communities by preventing and responding to fires and other emergencies, he was surprised that appropriate legislation was not in place to prevent the reckless release of sky lanterns in the height of summer in the heart of the Peak District. So our Chief Fire Officer supports a decision to prohibit the use of sky lanterns in England to protect our countryside, wildlife, the farming industry and beyond. Mr Speaker, all Welsh councils have banned the release of sky lanterns on council-owned land. 70 councils in England, from Plymouth to Carlisle, have done the same. But they cannot protect our countryside, animals and people from lanterns released on private land. There have been calls from across this House to prohibit sky lanterns. I hope that the advent of the Environment Bill will give the Government an opportunity to put into place this legislation that is sorely needed. But in the meantime, I beg this House to please accept this bill.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. If the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Kerry McCarthy, Sir David Amis, Sir Peter Bottomley, Jim Fitzpatrick, Sir Mike Penning, John Speller, Richard Benyon, Sir Patrick McLaughlin, Julian Sturdy, Antoinette Sandbach, Angela Smith and myself.
Thank you. Ruth George.
Sky Lanterns Prohibition Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 5th of April.
Friday the 5th of April. Thank you. Order. We now come to motion number 2 on business of the House. I inform the House that I've not selected any of the amendments. To move the motion, I call Sir Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to you and to the House authorities for the organisation that you have tentatively put in place for today. But of course, that organisation will only be able to operate if the House approves this business of the House motion, and I rise to move that motion now. And I'd like just to begin by explaining in as plain English as I can the 2 paragraphs of which it consists, neither of which is in any way complicated, but both of which have been drafted very carefully in order to ensure that the business proceeds smoothly and in good order as we go through what will no doubt be a quite complicated and highly contentious set of discussions about the substantive motions that have been tabled and which you, Mr. Speaker, have not yet selected amongst, but which will no doubt fall to be announced as a series of selections after we've completed the discussion and votes on the business of the House motion. So paragraph 1 is an effort to order today's business in an orderly way, given that there may be a considerable number of substantive motions that are selected by the Speaker and that will fall, therefore, to be debated and at 7 o'clock, if the business of the House motion is accepted, be voted upon. And I draw the attention, therefore, of honourable members first to subparagraph I in paragraph 1 of the business of the House motion, which describes the method of voting. It is the intention that in order to avoid taking too long voting on the substantive motions, we should retire into the 2 lobbies. There will be a lobby, I lobby, devoted to those whose names begin A to K, and the no lobby devoted to those whose names begin L to Z. And there will be in those lobbies voting slips, I think of a different colour, but very similar in character to the deferred division slips which we've used today and are quite used to using, which will be in a bundle and which will relate to all of those motions within the order paper motions for today that have been selected by the Speaker for vote at the end of the day. Of course I will.
The right honourable gentleman for giving way. It's just a general point. I don't often follow tweets as being law and the way in which things will be. But I've just seen a tweet that has said that number 10 is going to indicate that it will vote against the business motion in the attempt of thwarting all the measures the right honourable gentleman wishes to secure at 7 o'clock this evening. Would he agree that would be a misuse of parliamentary time by the government, given the will of the House only yesterday or the day before?
I don't know whether the honourable gentleman is reading a tweet that is, so to speak, a Trumpian tweet or an accurate tweet. I've followed the practice myself of not paying any attention to tweets of any kind at any time. But it may be that, as the honourable gentleman says, the government will decide to whip members on this side of the House against the Business House motion. That is, of course, a perfectly legitimate thing for the government to do if it wishes to do it. It's slightly sad, given that those of us who've prepared the Business House motion took great care to negotiate with the government a suitable way of including the statutory instrument which needs to be brought to alter exit day at the end of our proceedings, and that is provided for in an orderly way in the Business House motion, and I had hoped that that degree of cooperation might induce the government to look kindly on this Business House motion, but I'm perfectly aware that, as he is, that it was not the intention of the government to promote the indicative votes in the way in which this Business House motion does, and therefore I understand that they may whip against it. I hope that not only the honourable gentleman, but also those of my honourable friends who voted for this process in the first place will again vote in a division, if there is one, to sustain the business of the House motion and to allow us to continue the process which we inaugurated by voting by a narrow but nevertheless significant majority for Amendment A, which stood in my name a couple of days ago. And I look forward to being in the same lobby as the honourable gentleman as we do that. Yes, of course I will.
The right honourable gentleman said it was a significant majority who voted in favour of his amendment. 329 votes to 302. That was 52% to 48%. I
have to say that I think the honourable gentleman's, my honourable friend's mathematics is perfect. And I observe that he has attached quite significant emphasis to the vote on the referendum result. And therefore, I hope he joins me in the view that the majority for Amendment A was indeed significant. And I'd like to point out to him and some of my other honourable friends who share his general views on these matters, which I entirely respect, that I, unlike he, have voted consistently and will continue to vote consistently for the implementation of that referendum result through the means of the Prime Minister's deal and through a meaningful vote number 3, 4, 5 and to infinity. I shall go on voting for the Prime Minister's deal in order to fulfil the referendum mandate, and I profoundly hope that he might change his mind and join me in the lobbies to do so when it's necessary. Yes.
For my right honourable friend to give way, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there is movement towards MV3, meaningful vote 3, and there is some indication that there is, will he and his somewhat successful parliamentary insurgency work with the government to ensure that there is time, presumably early next week, if not this week, for a meaningful vote 3 to be back and presented to this House, either by way of a paving motion or directly? Thank you.
My honourable friend asks an entirely reasonable question to which there is an absolutely definitive answer. There has been no insurgency here. No, I will in a moment, but I must answer this point first. It's more productive to answer one point at a time.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely clear that this is not an insurgency at all. It is an adjustment of the standing orders for today, and if this is agreed for Monday, it does not affect tomorrow, nor does it affect Friday should the government choose to make Friday a sitting day. And either tomorrow or Friday, and I personally would entirely welcome this, the government may, of course, bring forward meaningful vote 3, for which I shall vote. I hope my honourable friends will vote for it. And I give him a further piece of good news, of which he will be easily capable of verifying, which is that should meaningful vote 3 pass on Thursday or Friday, there would be no further need for the whole of this process. This process has come about as a result of the increasing concern that many of us have had across the House of Commons that we were heading not towards an approval of the Prime Minister's deal, but, alas, towards a no-deal exit, which is something I pitted myself against for many months. And now, of course, I shall.
To the right honourable gentleman, and I'm very much enjoying the Letwin People's Parliament already. It's got much to commend itself, shall I say, to the right honourable gentleman. And I'm sure he finds it as astonishing as I do that the government are intending to vote against this business motion, because surely he'll agree with me that there was nothing to stop them bringing forward an amendment to his motion today, and there was nothing to stop them bringing an alternative business motion to the House today.
Indeed.
I promised myself throughout this process that I would be honest with the House, and I can't honestly say that I'm astonished that the government is voting against it. I have to say, although I regret it, I somewhat suspected it might be the case, as I suspect, in fact, he did. But I do share his view that it's a pity that actually the government didn't do what would have remedied what the government described as a constitutional oddity by endorsing Amendment A, and indeed at the right moment by putting themselves on Amendment A as signatories. They would have, of course, immediately under the parliamentary convention that you, Mr. Speaker, supervise, they would have arrived at the top of the order and superseded any mere backbenchers, and it would have become a government a government amendment, and all the ordinary order of the proceedings of the House would have been restored. That would have been the natural way to go. Alas, the government decided not to do that, and I understand they had reasons for it. May I just answer this, and then, of course, I'll come.
Turning to the subject my right honourable friend was on before, which is how we were going to be voting, can he say, or might the Chair be able to tell us, whether the voting papers will be available before we go into the lobby to avoid a great big crowd and the slowing down of the voting procedure?
Well, I'm sure that Mr. Speaker will want to say something about this at a later stage, but I believe that the House authorities, who've been may I just say, extraordinarily assiduous in this and have done way beyond their mere duty, will not only have provided for the relevant pieces of paper to be in the lobby at an early, or lobbies at an early stage, but also will have provided very large numbers of copies of the order paper, so that members will be able very quickly to refer from the voting slips to the actual amendments, so that nobody is in any confusion about what they are voting for or what they are voting against. Of course.
Right honourable member for giving way. The Speaker has ruled that no amendments will be taken, and obviously I wouldn't challenge the Speaker on that. But is not this today business motion different from what was agreed last week? Because now you are actually, the right honourable member is moving Monday as well, and the Amendment A in the name of my honourable member for Stoke has not been selected. The Speaker has not allowed these amendments. Surely now we are voting on something very different from what was agreed last week.
The honourable lady is absolutely right that paragraph 2, which I haven't, of course, because of taking interventions, yet had time to talk about, does indeed book a slot for Monday. And the reason that it books a slot for Monday is that I think there is quite a high chance that at the end of today's votes, despite the best endeavours of each of the promoters of each of the motions which it falls to be debated and voted upon, may not receive majority backing. And I said, if she will recall, during the, I don't know whether, maybe she wasn't present, but I said during the debate on Amendment A, very specifically, and it was a point echoed by many of her honourable friends in their remarks about Amendment A, that we all recognise that fact, that the first time round there would be very likely not to be a natural majority for one, I will in a moment, one proposition or another, and that therefore we should regard this as a process and not as a single point in time. And I did also specifically say that I therefore anticipated we would need a further day, and in many discussions and interviews, many of those of us who have proposed this Business of the House motion today and were supporting Amendment Day have made that point. So there's no novelty to it. It is simply carrying through what we said would be the case. And now, of course, I give way.
To that point of intervention, would he not agree with me that the government, having spent over 1,000 days on getting to where we are now, it would not be unreasonable for the House to have more one day to try to resolve this matter?
I do rather agree with the right honourable gentleman about that. And I have to say, it isn't the main burden of what I want to say today, but I have to say I share what may be his regret, that actually about 2.5 years ago the government didn't take steps to create a cross-party consensus on this matter. The Irish Taoiseach did exactly that, and I think put himself in a much stronger position as a result. And I hope that when all of this is over, and as I hope we have arrived at some sensible way of dealing with the whole Brexit issue, that the nation as a whole will learn that lesson, and that we will realise that when we have great national undertakings, it actually makes sense to try to get a cross-party consensus about how to take them forward. I give way to the Honourable.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Further to the point that was raised by my friend from Vauxhall, what assurances can we have that the business of the House motion that we will be asked to support on Monday will not also include another paragraph 2 that seeks to book a third day for indicative votes and then a subsequent motion? I believe the Honourable Member for Grantham and Stamford referred to it as daisy chaining in a briefing he had a conversation with. And if that is the Honourable Gentleman's case, can he be upfront about it? But could I also ask him, what does he think is going to change between today and Monday? Every member of this House has had an opportunity to lay a motion with their thoughts on the way forward. Every member of this House will have a chance to vote on an up-and-down straight vote, no knockout rounds. So will we not just repeat ourselves on Monday with the same potential options, the same votes, with the same arguments?
Well, I'm very delighted that the honourable gentleman, who's played an important part in these proceedings throughout, raises both of those points, because they're ones I wanted to come to anyway. Let me come to them in response to him rather than taking them later. In relation to the first question, whether there may be later stages beyond Monday, I don't believe that there needs to be any further round of voting after Monday on motions or propositions. I do believe, and I want to be very clear that I've said this to the honourable gentleman so that he can't later complain that there was any concealment at all, which is not part of our intention. I do believe that if a majority for a particular proposition does emerge on Monday, as I very much hope for reasons I'm about to come to that it will, and if the government doesn't immediately signal that it is willing to implement the majority view of the House of Commons at that point, and if the government has not by then, as I hope, though others may not, it will have achieved a vote in favour of MV3, then I think it would make sense for the House to move to the position of beginning to legislate to mandate the implementation of that majority. I think that would be a reasonable proceeding at that stage. It's only possible if we reach a majority view, of course. And now I come to the second part of his point, which is the question, why will Monday be any different from today? And I think the difference lies in two facts. First, this will be the first opportunity, and the right honourable gentleman who speaks for the Liberal Democrats made this point, after a very long time, when the House of Commons will actually, in an orderly way, have an opportunity to express the views in votes of members on specific propositions, and for us all to see how the lie of the land is. And I think when politicians do that, I will in a moment, when politicians do that, they very often discover that there is a basis for compromise and further informal offline discussion that can lead to the crystallisation of majorities. But in addition, it may be possible to structure the following Monday in a way that precipitates a majority, which it has not been the intention to do today. Today is purely indicative votes, and it's put today in a plain vanilla way, so everyone simply votes for all the things that they want to vote for and against all the things they want to vote against, and we will see what the numbers are. It's purely a first set of indications. I will now give way. May I give way to my honourable friend because he made such a splendid case against me earlier.
Mr. Speaker, I was trying to compliment my honourable friend. I was just suggesting he should be sitting on those benches. He making a very interesting and well thought out speech, as he always does. And he's being exceptionally honest with the House, saying that on Monday he will again be taking over the order paper. And that would then possibly lead to a legislative programme and a bill to implement whatever comes out as the most likely thing to succeed. Could he give the House an estimate of how many days he's going to have to take over between now and April the 12th, so that we can have a guide, and at least the government could have a guide when they might get some of their business done?
Well, I have to say that the coda in my honourable friend's remark was, I think, an amusement in the sense that I don't discern a vast pile of other government business of the first order of importance currently being transacted in this House. I think the government is rightly focused, as we all are, on the question of Brexit. And we're approaching the 12th, as he and I both know and as he mentioned. And he, of course, has a very different view of what would happen to our nation if on the 12th we left without a deal, and I respect that view. It is not my view. I don't believe it's the majority view of the House of Commons, as expressed in a series of votes. Those of us who are determined to follow that majority view, as conscientiously as he believes it's a good thing to leave without a deal, we believe conscientiously it is not a good thing to leave for our country without a deal, and therefore we want to prevent that eventuality. And the only way we can do that is by crystallising an alternative majority and trying to carry it forward, and that's what we will do. But there is an easy route to preventing that, which is for him and his like-minded colleagues, whose positions I understand, to compromise as many of the rest of us have compromised, and to vote for MV3. Were that to happen, none of this would be necessary. Yes, of course. Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't mentioned any more days than the days I've mentioned because I don't think it were necessary to have any more days. Though, of course, in the House of Lords, if there were legislation, there would have to be a day or days to legislate in the House of Lords. Yes.
Thank you for giving. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way again. I apologise for asking. I'm trying to find out about this process, as I suspect are millions of people throughout the country. The reason I ask about MV3 for next week is because if the right honourable gentleman has taken the order paper on Monday, if, for example, based on the opinions of the House today and Monday, we legislate for a customs union on Tuesday or Wednesday, then MV3 becomes redundant. So are we assuming, is my right honourable friend assuming, that the only day for a third meaningful vote on the government's withdrawal deal is this Thursday or this Friday, or can he envisage a time next week where there may be space for an MV3 to come back, for example, before a customs union day of legislation on the Wednesday? Thank you.
Well, that again is a perfectly reasonable set of questions, but again has a definitive set of answers. First of all, in relation, this is not any making of any member of this House or of the government. In relation to MV3 on Thursday or Friday this week, that timetable has been set by the EU. In their legal decision, they've made it clear that the withdrawal agreement has to be agreed by this House by, I think it's 11 p.m. our time, but in any event, late at night on Friday, in order for the 12th not to be activated and to move us to May the 22nd. And that is, of course, what would be necessary in order for the government to pass through the Withdrawal Act implementation bill, which is in turn necessary in order for the government's meaningful vote to be meaningful. Without a Withdrawal Act implementation bill, it's a nothing, as both he and other honourable members on both sides of the House who study this very well understand. So the fact is that the Thursday-Friday schedule this week is set by the EU, not by any of us. There's nothing I or anybody else here can do about it. And it's very important, therefore, for those of us who want to make sure that we don't drop out without a deal on the 12th, to ensure that if my honourable friends haven't supported those of us who are going to be in the lobbies voting for MV3 by Friday night, then there is an alternative, and this is the only way we can do it. Of course I can.
Would my right honourable friend explain how, if the House voted for a negotiation with Europe for a particular outcome that the government either thought wasn't desirable or wasn't negotiable, who would do the negotiating? Because it's normal for only the government to be a recognised negotiator.
First of all, my right honourable friend is, I think, one of the 2 or 3 most distinguished and long-serving members of Parliament today, and has had a distinguished record in government, and he knows as well as I do that he's absolutely right that only the government of the United Kingdom can negotiate with foreign powers. This is obviously true. But the truth is also that the government, like all the rest of us, is governed by the law. Just as much as any private individual, ministers are governed by the law. And it's a frequent occurrence that when ministers bring before the House of Commons a piece of legislation, that piece of legislation is amended in a way that ministers did not wish, and yet ministers then are compelled to implement the law that the House and the House of Lords have passed as it is written in the law. And that is a justiciable matter, and they're subject to judicial review if they don't do so. And as a matter of fact, we have a Prime Minister. I have on frequent occasions said that I don't think that the Prime Minister's strategy in the matter of Brexit has been ideally suited to the task. But the fact is, I've never met an honourable member of this House, or indeed any other living human being, who is more law-abiding than the Prime Minister. So I'm absolutely certain that she will, I'm absolutely certain that she will follow the law, not just in the letter, but in the spirit, where there are law, which flowed from a majority view of the House of Commons. Of course.
When the government normally has control of the order paper, if the House amended a piece of legislation in a way the government didn't like, it needn't bring the law into effect or go through the remaining proceedings to make it a law.
Well, my right honourable friend is, as one would expect, right, but actually the government often chooses not to do that. It often allows a piece of legislation which contains things it doesn't quite like to go forward because it has some greater objective. And the truth is, therefore, ministers often do, and he and I, as ministers, have both had this experience, find themselves implementing pieces of legislation with which they are not wholly in accord. And they know how to do that, and the civil service knows how to support them in doing that, and that is, of course, what would happen under those circumstances. Yeah, of course.
Would he not agree that it's actually a very novel proposition that the House would have to pass a law to affect the government's policy in this way? Can he think of any example in his experience, because mine's longer than his and I can't in mine, of the government pursuing a policy on such a vital national matter, knowing it did not have the support of the House of Commons in the way that it was going about it, and simply defying a majority that had voted for another approach?
As my right honourable friend is not just a former Chancellor and Lord Chancellor and almost everything else, but also the father of the House, he will certainly have more experience than most of the rest of us put together about this, and if he can't think of such a case, I'm certainly not going to be able to. And I don't know of such a case, and indeed, simply because of the possibility that people would raise this issue, I have done some research to try to find out whether there is any such case recorded by historians who have longer virtual memories, so to speak, than we have actual memories. And I have to say, I can't find one. And I think that suggests that there is a pretty strong precedent that if the House of Commons passes in a matter of extreme significance to the nation a resolution in favour of a clear view of how to proceed, it would be not unlawful, so far as I know, though that's a matter of the Attorney-General to rule on, obviously, and not for me, but not unlawful, but nevertheless very, very constitutionally unusual for the government not to accede to that resolution, to proceed in the way the House of Commons had requested it to do so under those circumstances. And I profoundly hope that if we reached Monday and we get to a majority view in favour of a particular proposition, that the government would say, as I think it ought to say, that it would then carry that forward. I'm merely protecting against the possibility that it takes the view that that is not a binding utterance by the House of Commons, and under those circumstances we do have methods through legislation of compelling, undoubtedly by law, an action which otherwise might not occur.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I mean, for example, he recalls the Maastricht Treaty, which caused a little difficulty on a cross-party basis in this House as well. Does he think if the government had been defeated by a motion on the Maastricht Treaty, disapproving of the treaty, that my right honourable friend and others who were then concerned about the treaty would have been content if the government had proceeded with its declared policy on the basis that it had stood on it at the election?
Well, the answer, obviously, to that question is no, I think, as he intends. He and I were on opposite sides, bizarrely, on that particular issue. I actually believe that the whole of this imbroglio is largely due to the fact that the wretched Maastricht Treaty was approved by this House in the first place. Had there not been qualified majority voting, the British people would probably never have come to disapprove of the European Union in the way they did, and we'd have been spared all this. But that is ancient history, and he and I have a long record of agreements and disagreements at different times. Tonight, this afternoon, we are agreed. Of course, I give way.
Full to my right honourable friend for giving way. In response to my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Rushcliffe, he said, for the government to ignore a motion of this House would be constitutionally very unusual. But it has to be said the process being gone through this afternoon is constitutionally deeply irregular.
Correct answer. Well, I'm particularly glad that my very distinguished honourable friend has participated in this part of our proceedings, because he hasn't, as it happens, though he's an assiduous attender at debates, obviously, he hasn't, as it happens, ever had the horror of having to listen to me on this subject before, because he hasn't been present when I've been speaking about it. And I've tried to say to those who were present on each occasion that the proposition he's just advanced is manifestly false. And the reason why it's manifestly false is this. The fact is that the order paper of the House of Commons, this is the most ancient principle of our Constitution, as a matter of fact, the order paper of the House of Commons is governed by the standing orders of the House of Commons, and the standing orders of the House of Commons are the property of the House of Commons, of nobody else, not of the executive, but of the House of Commons. And the courts recognise that in the principle that they apply, the principle of comity. They never interfere in the proceedings of our House, and that goes back not to the 1906 moment when the government, as in my view, improperly instituted the Standing Order 14 in its current form, but way back into the origins of, I will in a moment, way back into the origins of Parliament, where Parliament from the very beginning sought to establish its right, through you, Mr. Speaker, and otherwise, to control its own proceedings. And that's a very proper thing for Parliament to do, and we have been driven to doing this in an extreme emergency, as some of us see it. I know he has taken a rather different view, but in our view, this is an extreme emergency. We've driven to take it. We're doing it in a perfectly proper way through the amendment of standing orders, which it lies open to this House to make. And now, of course, I give way.
I can't entirely agree with this constitutional proposition the right honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, is putting forward. He will recall that in the Tudor House of Commons it was Privy Councillors who guided the business within the House. It is of the greatest antiquity that the business of the House is guided by those representing the sovereign in Parliament, and that principle is being eroded by today's proceedings.
Well, I little imagined that we would find ourselves debating the sequence of our constitutional history, but because my honourable friend is genuinely learned in the matter, and this may be my only opportunity ever to have this debate with him in the House of Commons before, thank goodness, I leave it. I want to explain to him that the succeeding history of our country was virtually focused on a debate about that very matter. It was because the House of Commons refused to be dominated by Privy Councillors that all the things that happened in the later 16th and 17th centuries happened. Exactly. And I am on the side of those in this House that I actually thought on the whole he was on the side of, who wished to assert over against the executive that in the end, ultimately, sovereignty lies here and not in Whitehall. Of course I do.
I'm entirely at one with the right honourable gentleman in what he said, but I have some sympathy with the point being made. But surely what we should recognise is that the reason that the House has been driven to these unusual proceedings today is because the government has failed to do its job.
Well, the right honourable lady, I mean, we have a stellar constellation here. There's another very distinguished member of the House who's held almost every post imaginable, tempts me into doing what I shall not do, which is to observe that actually it is the failure of cross-party consensus on this actually had two sides, and it would have been better actually if both sides had worked together, and that didn't happen. And it's because that didn't happen that we were at the mercy of the votes of some of my honourable friends, and that's why we are where we are. But I think she would agree with me that actually what matters now is none of that history. It's the fact that we are where we are and we need to find a solution, and that's what this is all about. Yes, of course, I give way.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and I want to bring him back to the business motion. Today, his proposal is that we should have indicative votes, and dependent on where a consensus appears to emerge, the House will have the opportunity to consider these matters again on Monday, and there will be a further business motion for Monday setting out in more detail than paragraph 2 the way that we will proceed then. I just wonder if he could undertake, as he did before, to share with the House the business motion before the deadline for putting in motions and amendments, so that all honourable members will be able to make the most of the opportunity next Monday.
The honourable lady raises a very serious and important point, and I think we should make that commitment because people do need the opportunity to see what rules of play would obtain on the Monday, and the opportunity to put down amendments to that and to consider in the light of that how to proceed. So I believe that if we're talking about Thursday, because there isn't a sitting Friday, and at the moment there isn't, I believe that we are curtailed at 5:30 approximately after the adjournment debate, and therefore I think we should make a commitment that we will lay the business of the House motion for Monday tomorrow, Thursday, assuming that there is no sitting Friday, by 3:30 tomorrow. So there are 2 hours for people to look at that and to put down amendments if they see fit. And incidentally, I agree with her, and it was part of the burden of what I was saying to my right honourable friend, the Father of the House, that there is ample scope for thinking now and in the succeeding hours, including during tomorrow morning, about possible methods of voting on Monday to encourage or even to ensure some further convergence to get to a majority in favour of some alternative. I give way, of course.
The right honourable friend. Of course, when he argues, when colleagues argue there is no precedence for this kind of event, there will in future be precedence for this kind of event, and that's the way in which parliamentary rules have grown up over many centuries. But will my honourable friend address the point that we will not yet know, and will not know for another hour and 6 minutes, exactly what motions we're going to be voting on, and we're expected to be voting on those at 7 o'clock. Will he ensure in future that actually the House gets a proper choice rather than the choice which is put by the Chair?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his observation about precedence. As a former Chief Whip, he very well knows how these things happen. And it is indeed the case that our Constitution has evolved through a series of adjustments, and there will be a precedent here. I hope, incidentally, because I'm not actually a revolutionary, that it will not be taken as a precedent for these things to happen every day of the week. I profoundly hope that our successors in this House will not for many decades face an emergency of the kind we are currently facing. This is not a way of proceeding that I think any of us would like our country to face in the future. But to come to his point about the motions, first of all, I am much more confident than his question suggests that you, Mr. Speaker, will select a full range of motions that represent a full range of views, and so there will be ample opportunity for people genuinely and openly to be supporting the positions that they wish to support and objecting to the positions they object to. And I think that we shall see that when Mr. Speaker makes his selection, because I know that his intention has been, as has mine and I think the House's as a whole, to try to use this as a genuine opportunity for people to come together on the basis of looking at a full range of options and having every sensible choice available to them. Yes, of course.
Is the right honourable member surprised, find it incredible actually, that the government apparently doesn't have an opinion on the motions that we're going to debate later on. Apparently the Cabinet is going to abstain and there's going to be a free vote for his colleagues. And yet they do have an opinion about denying this House the opportunity to have that debate on the indicative votes later on, because they're going to vote against the motion that he's proposing.
Well, I'm in the very odd position that, as it happens, I know, roughly speaking, what it is that the official machine has been saying about the whole of these proceedings. And I know that it has been raising very serious concerns about the whole idea of Parliament acting in this kind of way. And in fact, I've even had it reported to me that one very, very senior official described the situation as one in which it was necessary for Whitehall to save Parliament from itself. Not in a formal meeting, but outside one. Now, I understand that because as a minister in Cabinet for 6 years, I saw the way in which, in trying to govern the country appropriately, Whitehall necessarily takes the view that the Houses of Parliament altogether are quite an encumbrance. And it tries to govern the country in a way that will, so to speak, tolerate and obey the democratic necessities of a legislature that sometimes is annoying, but so far as possible, it governs the process. And it is very difficult for the official mind to absorb the fact that actually, ultimately, that isn't how our Constitution works. Ultimately, how our Constitution works is that governments depend on confidence in the House of Commons. The House of Commons is the sovereign body, or at any rate, the Houses of Parliament, the Crown in Parliament, is the sovereign body. And actually, this is a very important point we're making here about how this country is actually ultimately governed. And in that sense, I share my right honourable friend's point that this is a precedent. It's a precedent for Whitehall to recognise that in an emergency, the House of Commons is capable of controlling its own business in such a way as to find a solution that the vast majesties of Whitehall and government have not been able to provide us with. If they were able to provide us with this solution, if my honourable friends were willing to vote for the proposition which the government has conscientiously negotiated over a very long time, and in fact, in my view, rather admirably succeeded in negotiating, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So it's because Whitehall has failed, not due to the inadequacies of any individual, but due to the basic difficulty of the situation, that the Commons is taking these steps. And I think we're right to do so under those circumstances. I will, and then I'll come here.
I'm very grateful, Madam President. You're being very generous. And surely on that point, honourable friends are concerned about losing control of the order paper. Isn't therefore the answer that if the Leader of the House confirms we'll have a meaningful vote on Thursday or Friday, that when they go into the voting lobbies, they have one motto in mind: vote deal, take back control?
That is a neat way of expressing my honourable friend's view, with which, as it happens, I agree.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I'm listening very carefully to what he has said. And I think the thrust of it is that if meaningful vote 3 were to be approved, then none of this would be necessary to go forward. Will he therefore reiterate his call on all sides of this argument to support the withdrawal agreement? It may not be perfect for either side, but it is the best thing we have on offer, and now is the time to get behind it.
Well, as he knows, that is my view and has been my view throughout, which is why I voted for it throughout and will continue to do so. Yes, of course.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. To come back to the business motion, in particular paragraph 1I, I just wonder whether the right honourable gentleman could elucidate what he feels success would be for an amendment that we're voting on this afternoon, because there is an aye and nay in the vote. So what will success look like for an individual amendment, or is it a cumulative image created from all of the votes for all of the amendments that Mr. Speaker no doubt will choose in due course?
I'm delighted that the honourable gentleman brings me back to the business of the House motion, because it is traditional in these circumstances for people who are speaking to say that they'd like to make some progress, and I certainly haven't made very much yet. My view is that this is not about the number of votes precisely cast for one motion or another, or indeed against one motion or another. It's about whether, when we look at the results as a whole, and when we act in the way that I think politicians across the parties acting in the national interest can act, which is to seek a consensus, we get enough data to enable us to have sensible conversations about where we can go next. That's what I think would constitute a success here. And I don't know any way to do that other than to have the kind of process we're going through, and that's why I suggested that we should go through it, and so did others. Yes, of course.
Will he recall that the last time we went through something remotely like this was 2009 in relation to Jack Straw's well-meaning but ultimately doomed attempt to get a sense of where we should be going with House of Lords reform? And I fear that today's proceedings will end up very much in the same place.
Well, but my honourable friend needs to attend to the point that those of us who are proposing this have exactly recognised that precedent. What went wrong on that occasion, I think, above all, was that it was a single point in time, and it did not produce a single answer, and therefore it was declared a failure. We are not seeking a single point in time here. We're seeking a process. We're using the first stage of that process as an act of discovery. We're then having a number of days in which politicians can talk to one another and try to achieve a consensus. That can be reflected in a further vote or set of votes. And that's a very different process. I think had that process been applied in the case of the House of Lords, we might by now actually have had a sensibly restructured House of Lords, which, alas, we don't. But that is another piece of history that I'm sure I mustn't deal with. Of course.
Very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's making a very powerful case for giving the chance to the House today to express its views. Further to the point the Chair of the Northern Ireland Select Committee just raised, the truth is we don't know what this will produce. It's called indicative votes for a reason, because it's intended to give an indication to what the House thinks. But isn't the most powerful point that is not an argument, the uncertainty is not an argument for not trying, bearing in mind that we are potentially, 16 days away from leaving with no agreement if the Prime Minister's deal does not pass, and if the EU were, heaven forbid, to refuse us a further extension, and we should really get on with it.
I just completely agree with every word of that. I think that is exactly the point that the right honourable gentleman makes, is exactly the reason why we are proceeding in this way. And I just want to take this opportunity, incidentally, to pay tribute to him and to his right honourable friends with whom we've been cooperating on this. Actually, it's been a pleasure. And the reason it's been a pleasure is because we share a fundamental concern with the interests of our country to have a way forward that is orderly and that does not leave us with a disaster by mistake. We may differ about many things, but on that we are entirely joined, and that is the very purpose of this exercise. Mr. Speaker, although I haven't myself said very much of what I was going to say, I think I have now gone on much too long, and it has been in response to quite a lot of interventions. I discern there aren't any more around, so I think it falls to me to resume my seat.
The question is the business of the House motion as on the order paper. I call the Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, I rise briefly to respond on behalf of the Government. Firstly, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, who has sought to ensure that the Government's business for today, a very important statutory instrument that regularises the legal position vis-à-vis our exit day from the European Union, is able to be addressed. Mr. Speaker, the Government is disappointed that the amendment in the name of my right honourable friend for West Dorset and others was agreed by the House on Monday. A clear commitment had been made by the Government to provide time for the House to find a majority for a way forward. I take my role as Leader of the House very seriously. I have always been very clear that the Government will listen carefully to Parliament. But today's motion is an extremely concerning precedent for our democracy. I won't take any interventions because this is a backbench day in the name of my right honourable friend. For many years, the convention has been that it is for the Government, as elected by the people, and with the confidence of this House, to set out the business. It is for Parliament to scrutinise, to amend, to reject and to approve. What today does is effectively turn that precedent on its head. Those who are not in government are deciding the business. and there are inevitable...
Order. I apologise for the Leader's House. Point of order, Mr Nicholas Bowles.
Mr Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, just acclaimed that the people elect the government. Is it not the case that the people elect members of Parliament who, by majority, decide whether they can form and support and have confidence in a government?
The gentleman is constitutionally correct. He's made his own point in his own way with his customary fluency, but the Leader of the House now has the floor again. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What today does is effectively turn that precedent on its head. Those who are not in government are deciding the business, and there are inevitable ramifications to that. I work constantly to represent Parliament's voice in government, and today I am genuinely concerned that the decisions we are being obliged to make could result in Parliament being extremely frustrated. It is highly likely that we could be in a position where the preferences of the House simply cannot be achieved. Whatever the House decides needs to be both deliverable and negotiable. And very specifically, the European Union has been clear in all circumstances that changing the withdrawal agreement is simply not an option. This government wants to deliver on the referendum of 2016 in a way that maintains a deep and special partnership with the European Union. Urgent action is needed. Businesses and people cannot be left in limbo any longer. There are two sides to this negotiation, so I repeat that what the House decides needs to be deliverable, it needs to be negotiable, and it also needs to deliver on the referendum. I won't. The Council conclusions agreed last week set out that the withdrawal agreement in all circumstances must be adopted by the United Kingdom. So I would urge colleagues to accept that approving the withdrawal agreement, which is complex and which covers wide-ranging areas from citizens' rights to farming, from overseas territories to security and financial services, has to be the first step. The EU have said that the withdrawal agreement will not be changed, and Parliament needs to accept that before we can look to the future partnership, which is what much of today's debate will focus on. Notwithstanding that no amendments have been selected, in particular, I do hope that should the debate today proceed in accordance with the business of the House motion, it will allow for all motions to be fully considered, rather than just a select few. This would enable Parliament to establish what it does want, rather than what the selection would permit. Mr Speaker, the Government has consistently said that we do not support the approach the House has taken to remove government control of the order paper, no matter the circumstances. For that reason, we will oppose today's business of the House motion. While it is now up to Parliament to set out next steps in respect of today's business, the Government will continue to call for realism in the debate ahead. Any options considered must be deliverable in negotiations with the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. The Shadow Leader of the House, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Honourable Member for West Dorset for the business of the House motion. And I hear what the Leader of the House has said. Mr Speaker, we are living in unprecedented times, and that is why this business of the House motion has been moved by the Honourable Member. Mr Speaker, it saddens me to look around on the benches opposite at some of the most wonderful and fantastic ministers who've left government, and they've done so because they are frustrated and they do not see a way forward. Mr Speaker, we are on this side are going to support the motion. We know these are unusual circumstances. The House has ruled and the House has decided that they want to proceed in this way. All the honourable members that I've seen and I've spoken to today have decided, and they are honourable members who've been working for a long, long time, honourable members like a former Attorney General, chairs of select committees, the honourable member for West Dorset, who's written manifestos for the government, who's played a vital role, a former vice chair of the Tory party, excellent people. They all agree that something has to be done. Mr. Speaker, it is you that have to control the businesses of the House. We're not talking about personalities. We're talking about the office of the Speaker.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Leader of the House for giving way. The Leader of the House claimed at the dispatch box that she speaks for this House in government. How can we possibly take her at face value when she wouldn't take a single intervention, when the House has made clear that the business today was to be decided by the House, and when she talks about, I mean, this is where it becomes jaw-droppingly hypocritical, I think. She says, on one hand, sorry, Mr. Speaker,
I'm sure the honourable gentleman wouldn't make a personal charge which impugned the integrity of the leader. Members can make a wider political charge, but not a personal charge. West Reading.
Mr. Speaker, out of respect for you and the rules of the House, I will certainly withdraw the word hypocritical. But I would just say to my honourable friend that it was pretty jaw-dropping to hear the Leader of the House on one hand claim that it's Mr. Speaker's responsibility to select every amendment, when she herself believes that we shouldn't vote on a single amendment today, and when she herself will not be casting a vote one way or another on a single amendment. Isn't this just a complete farce?
Can I thank the honourable member for his intervention and say this, that honourable members have mentioned that the House is listening, the Prime Minister is listening. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, has met with honourable members but has not listened. The fact is we are in unusual times. This is a hung Parliament, and the government is only governing on a supply and confidence agreement, nothing else. Yes, I will.
The Shadow Leader. For the Shadow Leader giving way, I'm sure she'll give way to the Father of the House as well, unlike, sadly, the Leader of the House. Did she share my concern at the assertion that the withdrawal agreement cannot be renegotiated, and yet we were told in no uncertain terms by the government that the so-called Malthouse agreement, which fundamentally changed the withdrawal agreement, was something to be commended and worked on, and I think actually public money was spent on advancing it.
Can I thank the honourable lady for her intervention? And, Mr. Speaker, when we speak about the withdrawal agreement and whether it can be amended or not, I have sitting beside me the Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the Union, and he has been in discussions with the European Union. We have been in a union with the European Union for over 40 years, and we know that they would be open to any discussions, as they have had with my honourable friend. They will be open to discussions if that's what is decided. Mr. Speaker, we cannot ignore what our constituents, what people have said to us last weekend, how they took time out of all different generations to tell Parliament exactly what's going on.
She will recall that the Prime Minister tried to dissuade the House from taking control of the business by saying that if we didn't, the government would allow time for indicative votes to be taken. But we were never given any details, any clear commitment, or any undertaking that any notice would have been taken of those motions. Now, today we have this alleged constitutional crisis that the House is setting the business. If the government had tabled a motion, an amendment, setting out its own clear proposals for taking the views of the House and discovering what the favourite option was to proceeding, then this whole argument about the process could have been avoided as an irrelevant, and we could have resumed the serious business of making sure that a majority in this House is in support of the government policy being pursued.
Mr. Speaker, I can't follow that other than to say that I've always admired the honourable member, even before I was in this place, I'm totally in awe of him. But I absolutely agree with what he says.
Steve Rice.
Yeah.
Well done. I
Thank the Shadow Leader for giving way. I will support the motion today, as I did to get us here on Monday, to great sadness, because we are living in extraordinary times, and because this House of Commons is at an impasse. And we, as the House of Commons, have to solve this, and it's the last roll of the dice for us to be able to do that. Otherwise, all other options, however unpalatable, are on the table. But would she not agree that, given that out there the view of this House right now is not at its highest point, shall we say, this is an opportunity for this House of Commons to surprise, in a good way, the British public?
Can I thank the honourable member and for his work as an extraordinary minister. He's been absolutely fantastic, and I know I've seen him over the weeks how difficult that decision to resign was, and actually thank him for being such a good minister. But I do agree with him. And I'm coming to you in a minute. I think the key thing, Mr. Speaker, is that members of this House have tried to speak to the Prime Minister to try to say exactly what this House wants and what this House has decided on. Mr. Speaker, I just say this. If we just relied on precedent, then I don't think you or I would be standing here as members of Parliament. I think we'd have had to have wealth, we'd have had to have property, and for women we might have had to have something else, if I can not be too rude. Yes, I will.
Keep going, I thank the honourable member for giving way, especially on the point of precedent and what we do. Would she agree with me that actually, even though we've got an unwritten constitution in this country, at times of national emergency, constitutional invention is what has got us through, whether it's the national government during the two world wars and the full-blown coalition to solve the financial crisis in 2010. And actually what was needed in this particular situation, given that the government doesn't have a majority and it is not clear what the majority is for any of the Brexit options, what was needed right from the start was that kind of constitutional invention, and the lack of it has not really helped with the passage of the government withdrawal bill. And we should actually be thanking the member for West Dorset for doing this. We would rather not be here, but we are here, and invention is what is needed at this time.
Can I thank them? I was going to say another excellent minister, and I was sorry to see him leave his position. He has been absolutely fantastic, and I do agree with him. I think this point about precedent is really important, Mr. Speaker. Nothing is in aspic. No rules or procedures. I've been, as my working life as a lawyer, I've seen the civil procedure rules turned over, and we move forward. We don't look back. Even Erskine May, with the greatest respect to my honourable friend, even Erskine May is outdated. Yes, I will.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Leader of the House for giving way. Further to the discussion about whether or not this is or is not a constitutional outrage and the points of order for my honourable friends earlier, would she agree with me that this House has always, since the Civil War, controlled its own time? And the only reason that the business of the House is normally controlled by the government is with the consent of the majority that it carries, with the confidence of the members who support it. What the House is doing today is asserting that its primacy is to control the business of this House, as it always has been and always will be.
Can I thank the honourable member? And I have to say the House today is only responding to what the House agreed on Monday. Let's face it, Mr. Speaker, we would not have had the meaningful vote if the House hadn't agreed to this, if we hadn't put through that motion. We had to struggle to get it. And let me just talk about percentages, of the meaningful vote. So the first meaningful vote was won by a percentage of 68% to 32%, and the second by 62% to 38%. I'll give way to the honourable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Shadow Leader of the House, returning to the business that we're looking at now, there clearly has been a change in the Labour Party's position, because up to today we've always thought that if the Labour Party didn't support the government's position and they didn't think the House supported the government, they'd move a motion of no confidence in the government, which is the normal way to proceed, not to have an alternative government established. So can I take from this that we, in fact, will no longer have motions of no confidence from the Labour Party?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the correct term, I'm sure you will correct my honourable friend, is that we are Her Majesty's opposition, and we are responsible Her Majesty's opposition, and we want to try and find a way through, which is what all honourable members from all sides are trying to do. A good way.
Just actually on that point, as we have already heard this afternoon, there are quite profound constitutional implications of what is happening before us today. And I think that the House will have to, at some point in the not too distant future, actually have some mechanism to consider the profound constitutional implications. But that shouldn't take away the fact that we are concerned about an immediate crisis which is before us now. And in the interest of pragmatic democracy, it is essential, I would argue, that we do find a way forward. But bear in mind, we have to, at some point in the not too distant future, return to these big issues.
I can't add anything more to that, my honourable friend's excellent intervention. Oh, yes.
I thank the Shadow Leader of the House for giving way, and I will be supporting this motion. And I want to also put on record my thanks to the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset and Leeds Central and others, and I'm proud to have worked with them on how we try and move forward in this House. And, perhaps she will agree with me, when I first drafted the original one of the original meaningful votes amendments in December 2017, it was precisely because of my concern at that time that should a deal not be agreed by this House, that this House would need some sort of process or roadmap by which we would then